Ethan preferred the company of silence. People drained him. Their incessant chatter grated on his nerves. He lived alone in a worn apartment building on the city's edge, a forgotten corner where shadows lingered. His days were spent in quiet contemplation, reading worn paperbacks or simply staring out the window. He liked to observe the cityscape from afar, finding a strange comfort in the anonymity of the distant lights. Ethan cherished his solitude. He relished the peace of his small, cluttered apartment. The outside world with its demands and expectations felt distant, a muffled hum from another reality. He had grown accustomed to this self-imposed isolation, finding a strange solace in the absence of human interaction. It suited him, this life on the periphery. One evening, a peculiar silence descended upon the city. It was a silence so profound, so absolute that it felt almost tangible. The usual symphony of city sounds, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic, the murmur of voices, had vanished. Ethan, drawn by the unsettling quiet, peered out his window. He noticed an unsettling stillness in the building opposite his own. Usually, a hive of activity, tonight, it stood eerily vacant. No lights flickered in its windows, no figures moved behind the drawn curtains. The usual glow of televisions and the soft hum of life had been extinguished. Ethan felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. It was as if someone had pressed the pause button on the city, suspending it in a state of unsettling limbo. He tried to shake off the feeling, but the silence pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. Ethan instinctively reached for his phone, needing to break the silence with a familiar voice, a connection to the outside world, but his phone remained stubbornly silent. No signal bars, no dial tone. The silence had swallowed the airwaves. Panic began to claw at the edges of his composure. He rushed to his computer hoping for an explanation, a news update, anything, but the internet was down, the screen dark and lifeless. Driven by a growing sense of dread, Ethan decided to venture outside. He had to see for himself, had to understand the unsettling emptiness that had enveloped his world. The streets were deserted, the sidewalks bare. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of the road, their doors left ajar. The city was a ghost of its former self, a silent, empty stage. And then he saw it, a figure standing at the end of the street. Tall and slender, it moved with an unnatural fluidity, seeming to glide over the pavement rather than walk. One moment it was a distant silhouette, the next it was close, unnervingly close. Ethan's vision swam, the figure growing, distorting, and then everything went black. Ethan awoke with a gasp. He was lying in his bed, the morning light filtering through the gaps in his blinds. The city sounds had returned, the distant drone of traffic, the muffled voices from the street below. Had it all been a nightmare? A particularly vivid hallucination? He sat up, trying to calm his racing heart, yet something felt off, out of place. His apartment, usually cluttered and chaotic, was strangely tidy. His books were neatly stacked on the shelf, his clothes folded and put away. Even the overflowing trash can had been emptied. He walked into the kitchen, his unease growing with every step. The refrigerator, which he distinctly remembered being nearly empty, was now fully stocked with fresh produce and neatly arranged containers. He had no recollection of going grocery shopping. The air itself felt different, charged with an unseen energy. Section 5. The Mirror's Gaze. Ethan wandered through his apartment, his apprehension growing with each passing moment. Nothing made sense. It was his apartment, yet it felt subtly altered, as if someone had rearranged the furniture while he slept. Then he noticed it. A large, ornate mirror now hung on his bedroom wall, where before there had been only bare plaster. It was an imposing thing, its frame crafted from dark, polished wood. Ethan approached the mirror cautiously, his gaze drawn to his reflection. His heart pounded against his ribs as he noticed something peculiar. His reflection moved independently, a slow, unsettling smile spreading across its lips. It was a smile that didn't reach the eyes, a smile that spoke of something cold and calculating. He stumbled back, fear gripping his throat like an icy hand. The room seemed to warp around him, the familiar becoming strange and distorted. The air crackled with static electricity. A low hum vibrated in his ears, growing louder, morphing into a voice, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the depths of his own mind. It spoke his name, a sibilant hiss that sent shivers down his spine. "Ethan," it whispered, "you shouldn't be awake." He wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused to obey. He was rooted to the spot, frozen in place by an unseen force. The mirror seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a falling stone. The reflection of his apartment flickered, replaced by fleeting glimpses of something else. Dark, shifting shapes moved in the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were watching him, observing his every move. Ethan blinked, trying to clear his vision. The room flickered once more, the fleeting images solidifying into a chilling tableau. His reflection was gone, replaced by a series of screens, each displaying a different scene. He saw himself sleeping, oblivious to the figures that moved around his bed. He saw himself walking down the deserted street, unaware of the eyes that followed his every move. He saw himself staring back at his reflection, a look of dawning horror on his face. It was a surveillance state, a macabre reality show, and he was the unwitting star. He was trapped in a digital panopticon, his every move monitored, his every thought scrutinized. His life, his solitude, had been invaded by something sinister, something that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. The voice in his head returned, colder, more insistent than before. "We are watching," it whispered, the words slithering into his mind like venomous snakes. "We are always watching." Ethan tore his gaze away from the mirror, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He had to escape, had to get out of this apartment, this city. But where could he go? Who could he turn to for help? He was alone, utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The world outside his window seemed both familiar and alien. The once comforting anonymity of the city now transformed into a source of profound unease. He was a prisoner in his own home, a lab rat under the unblinking gaze of unseen observers. A sharp buzzing sound pierced the air, drawing Ethan's attention back to his phone lying on the nightstand. It was glowing, the screen illuminated with a single message. "Go back to sleep, Ethan," it read. The words pulsed on the screen, a menacing command that sent a chill down his spine. Ethan stared at the message, his mind reeling. Was this the only escape? To surrender to the darkness, to retreat into the oblivion of sleep? He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that disobedience was not an option. The forces that now held him captive were beyond his comprehension, their motives shrouded in a darkness he could only dimly perceive. He was at their mercy, a puppet dancing on strings he couldn't see, and as the pull of exhaustion became too strong to resist, he knew he had nowhere left to run.